August 6, 1943. 23:33 hours. Somewhere in the pitch-black waters of the Solomon Islands, 6 American destroyers cut through the inky night, their wakes illuminated only by the faint glimmer of stars hidden behind heavy clouds. The air was thick with the scent of salt and diesel, and the sea, restless and unpredictable, slapped against the hulls in a rhythm that matched the nervous heartbeat of every sailor on board. You can almost feel the tension as if you were standing on deck, gripping the cold steel railing, listening to the distant, low hum of engines and the soft chatter of men preparing for what could be a deadly encounter. Commander Frederick Moosbrugger, a man known among his peers for calm decisiveness, stood on the bridge of the USS Dunlap, eyes fixed on the radar console before him. Unlike the crews of the cruisers lost months earlier at Savo Island, he didn't squint into darkness, waiting for enemy silhouettes to emerge. He had something the Japanese didn't: SG surface search radar, a breakthrough that allowed his destroyers to see in the dark, to hunt in complete invisibility. On this night, the invisible battlefield stretched over 30,000 yards of treacherous waters, and Moosbrugger's 6 ships moved like shadows in a deadly dance, guided by signals flickering on a small green screen. Below decks, radar operators hunched over their instruments, scanning the phosphorescent displays for any sign of the approaching Japanese force. Every blip on the screen was a heartbeat, a potential threat, a chance to strike before they were struck. These men were the unsung heroes of modern warfare, translating pulses of microwaves into life-and-death intelligence, their fingers dancing across dials and switches with meticulous precision. They could detect a destroyer at nearly 17 miles, while their enemies relied on lanterns, binoculars, and chance. Above them, the night was deceptive in its tranquility. The Solomons had been a graveyard of Allied ships in previous months. At Savo Island alone, Japanese forces had carved through Allied cruisers with brutal efficiency, sinking 4 and taking more than 900 lives. The memory of those defeats hung like a shadow over Moosbrugger's fleet. The old SC radar could not distinguish friend from foe, island from enemy vessel, leaving American sailors blind until it was too late. But the SG radar, born from the minds at MIT's Radiation Laboratory and powered by the revolutionary British magnetron, promised a new reality, a chance to turn the tables, to fight the night on their terms. Every sailor felt the weight of that moment. Torpedoes were already primed, guns loaded, and orders rehearsed silently in every mind aboard the ships. The Pacific, normally a vast and indifferent expanse, now seemed alive with the pulse of potential conflict. Moosbrugger's voice cut through the tension, calm yet authoritative: "Stay sharp. They don't see us, but we see everything." And then, at 23:33 hours, the green glow of the radar screens flickered with life. Blips emerged from the darkness: 3 Japanese destroyers, unaware, unwitting, and doomed. Moosbrugger's hand hovered over the plotting tools. Every second mattered. Every decision would reverberate across the oceans, across history. This was the dawn of a new kind of warfare. Not with the sun illuminating the field, not with flares or searchlights, but with invisible waves of energy guiding men's hands and shaping the fate of ships. In these moments, technology and human skill fused, creating a predator in the night that the Japanese would never anticipate. The hunt had begun. The radar operators' eyes never left their screens. Blips danced across the phosphorescent glass like fireflies in the night, each one a whisper of movement that Moosbrugger translated into strategy. Around him, the bridge buzzed quietly with controlled tension. Helmsmen adjusted course by fractions of a degree, signalmen readied silent lights for communication, and lookouts, still scanning the dark waves, remained oblivious to the true advantage their fleet held. Moosbrugger's plan was simple yet audacious. Instead of engaging in the predictable daylight assaults or waiting for the Japanese to stumble into visual range, he would close in under the cover of darkness, using radar to track, target, and strike before the enemy even realized they were under attack. The 6 destroyers, Dunlap, Craven, Maury, Lang, Stack, and Sterrett, formed a loose crescent, their positioning calculated to maximize coverage and minimize exposure. Each ship mirrored the others, a choreography rehearsed in briefings, honed by months of experience, and now executed in complete silence. Below decks, the SG radar operators maintained a steady rhythm. The machine emitted pulses of microwave energy that bounced off targets and returned almost instantaneously, painting an invisible map on their screens. Unlike the old SC radar, SG could distinguish a small enemy vessel from a phantom island or floating debris. It was a technological eye in the dark, a silent observer that turned uncertainty into precision. Each ping confirmed a Japanese silhouette, 3 destroyers moving along the anticipated patrol route, completely unaware of the predators shadowing them. Moosbrugger crouched over the plotting table, his finger tracing the tracks. Range, 29,500 yards. Bearing, slightly starboard, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. His words were calm, but in them was the weight of responsibility. One miscalculation could result in disaster. One error could turn hunter into hunted. Then came the moment that would define the battle. Orders flowed silently down the line. Torpedo crews readied tubes, gun crews prepped for rapid fire, and radar operators continued their meticulous tracking. The destroyers advanced, each blip on the radar confirming position, speed, and course. Moosbrugger's voice broke the tension once more, firm and decisive. All ships, hold fire until range is optimal. Torpedoes, prepare to launch on my mark. Time slowed in the minds of men who had seen the aftermath of previous Solomon's engagements. Memories of Savo Island and Vella Gulf haunted the crews, the thunder of shells, the screams in the dark, the helplessness of sailors blinded by night. But tonight was different. Tonight, the Americans had the advantage. They weren't relying on chance or eyesight. They were guided by invisible waves of technology, by the precision of human intellect amplified by innovation. And then, at 23:38 hours, Moosbrugger gave the order. Fire torpedoes. Across the 6 destroyers, 24 Mark 15 torpedoes roared silently from their tubes, cutting through the water with lethal precision. The radar operators tracked every trajectory, adjusting for speed and course with rapid calculations. Moments later, reports came in, 3 Japanese destroyers struck simultaneously. Explosions ripped through the night, flames licking the sky, and the water erupted in columns of fire and smoke. Not a single American ship had been hit. Not a single sailor had fallen. For the first time in the Pacific campaign, American destroyers had decisively won a night engagement, not by luck, not by brute force, but by mastering the darkness itself. The SG radar had turned vulnerability into dominance, allowing small ships to hunt efficiently and lethally. The sea erupted around the Japanese destroyers, but the American ships remained ghosts in the night. Smoke and fire illuminated fleeting shadows on the water, yet none of Moosbrugger's men felt the panic that had gripped Allied sailors in prior battles. Below decks, radar operators continued their vigil, scanning for any remaining blips that might indicate a survivor or a hidden threat. Their hands, steady and precise, moved over dials and switches as if conducting a deadly symphony. On the bridge of the USS Dunlap, Moosbrugger leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the screens. The enemy ships were sinking fast, but he remained cautious. He knew that Japanese destroyers were fast, agile, and capable of sudden maneuvers even under fire. Every second counted. Maintain stations. Track all movement. No assumptions, he ordered. His voice carried authority and calm, the kind that steadied every sailor aboard. In the darkness, the Japanese crews scrambled. Confusion reigned. They fired sporadically into the blackness, aiming at sounds and shadows that didn't exist. They had no idea their attackers were invisible, guided by pulses of radar energy bouncing silently across the water. The Americans, however, watched everything unfold like spectators in a theater. They had the advantage of sight without exposure, knowledge without risk. As the last of the enemy destroyers broke apart, Moosbrugger allowed himself a brief exhale. The attack had been executed flawlessly. 24 torpedoes in 63 seconds had decimated the Japanese formation. 3 destroyers, gone. American casualties, 0. In a single, decisive strike, the tide of night naval combat had shifted. But the victory was not just in the sinking of ships. It was in the validation of a concept that had been doubted by many in the Navy. Radar, once an experimental technology, had proved that it could change the rules of engagement. The Solomon's campaign had been a nightmare for American forces, with Japanese night tactics dominating every encounter. For months, the US Navy had struggled, losing cruisers, destroyers, and hundreds of sailors to ambushes under the cover of darkness. Now, those patterns were broken. In the aftermath, Moosbrugger's destroyers moved carefully through the smoking wreckage, searching for survivors and ensuring no threats remained. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burning oil and cordite. Fires on the enemy ships cast an eerie glow, reflecting in the wary eyes of American sailors who had faced death so many times before. But tonight, for the first time in months, they felt the sweet taste of control. They had turned night into an ally, invisibility into a weapon. Even as the adrenaline began to fade, Moosbrugger knew this was just the beginning. The Navy had discovered a new form of warfare, one in which technology, leadership, and courage combined to allow small, agile forces to dominate the night. Every operator, every gunner, Every sailor who had trusted the radar that night had participated in a transformation that would echo across the Pacific. As dawn approached, the 6 destroyers slipped back toward friendly lines, leaving behind smoldering wreckage and the stunned silence of a Japanese fleet defeated without warning. This was no mere tactical victory, it was a turning point, a demonstration that American innovation could not only match but surpass the tactical ingenuity of their adversaries. The morning light of August 7 barely touched the waters of the Solomon Islands, yet the night's events still shimmered in the minds of the men aboard Moosbrugger's destroyers. The sea was calm now, almost serene, a stark contrast to the violence that had raged hours earlier. Below decks, radar operators cleaned their instruments, their hands steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through their veins. They knew they had witnessed the future of naval combat. Back on the bridge, Commander Moosbrugger gathered his officers for a quiet debrief. "Radar isn't just a tool," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It's our eyes when the night tries to blind us. Tonight, we proved that leadership and technology, when combined, are stronger than surprise or speed alone." He traced the radar plots from the previous night, pointing to the Japanese formation, their movements, and the exact moments the torpedoes found their marks. The officers leaned in, absorbing every detail. This was more than a lesson, it was a blueprint for future night engagements. The SG radar, developed at MIT's Radiation Laboratory, had been decades in the making, built on the British cavity magnetron that transformed long, clunky radio waves into precise microwave signals. It was a technological marvel, capable of detecting objects at extraordinary distances, even in poor weather or complete darkness. Yet without Moosbrugger's leadership, the sophistication of the radar might have gone unused, or worse, misapplied. The synergy of innovative equipment and decisive command had created a force multiplier, allowing destroyers once vulnerable in the night to dominate the battlefield. In the broader context of the Pacific War, the victory at Vella Gulf was monumental. The Japanese had dominated nocturnal surface engagements for months, exploiting American deficiencies in radar and night fighting doctrine. Allied forces had suffered devastating losses, from Savo Island to Kula Gulf, and morale had been shaken by repeated defeats. Each night was a test of survival, and every failed engagement had underscored the urgent need for technological advancement and tactical innovation. Now, the narrative had changed. American destroyers, guided by radar and disciplined command, could strike unseen, disrupt enemy formations, and withdraw without loss. The battle had demonstrated that the advantage of superior equipment was meaningless without trained operators and decisive leaders to wield it. Radar had leveled the playing field, transforming the night from a realm of fear into a domain of opportunity. Across the Pacific, word of the engagement spread quickly among Navy ranks. Reports highlighted the flawless coordination, the use of SG radar, and the complete annihilation of the enemy without American casualties. The battle became a case study in modern naval warfare. Technology alone did not win the night, but in the hands of men who understood its potential, it could achieve what once seemed impossible. And yet, for those on the Dunlap, Craven, Maury, Lang, Stack, and Sterrett, there was little time for celebration. The Solomons remained a volatile theater, Japanese forces were still active, and the stakes in the Pacific were higher than ever. But one undeniable truth had been proven: the Americans could now fight the night on their own terms, and the psychological edge had shifted irreversibly. News of the Vella Gulf victory rippled through the Pacific Fleet like a shockwave. In briefing rooms and aboard carriers hundreds of miles away, officers pored over after-action reports, radar plots, and torpedo trajectories. The implications were staggering. With SG radar, destroyers, once considered the underdogs of night battles, could now strike with surgical precision, neutralizing the Japanese advantage that had haunted the Solomons for months. Commanders began to envision a new doctrine of night warfare, one that relied not on luck or visual spotting, but on calculation, coordination, and technological mastery. Meanwhile, in the Solomons themselves, Japanese commanders grappled with the reality of an enemy who could see through the night. Their tactics, honed through months of ambushing unsuspecting Allied ships, suddenly seemed obsolete. The once dreaded night became a domain of uncertainty. Survivors of the sinking destroyers were interrogated and debriefed, revealing how blindsided they had been by an invisible foe. Reports described explosions erupting without warning, ships vanishing into flames before a single gun could return fire. For the Japanese, the fear that had long fueled their night operations was now mirrored by American confidence. For the American sailors, the victory brought more than morale, it brought proof of the effectiveness of their training and trust in technology. Radar operators, often overlooked and tucked away below decks, were celebrated for their critical role. Each blip on a green screen had represented a decision point, a chance to save lives or lose them, and their flawless execution validated years of research and preparation. The Navy's investment in radar technology, and the willingness to integrate it into tactical doctrine, had paid off in ways that would reshape the Pacific War. Strategists at headquarters quickly recognized the broader significance. Night battles, once perilous gambles, could now be conducted with far greater certainty. Destroyer divisions were retrained to operate in coordination with radar, learning to move like coordinated shadows, invisible to the enemy but devastatingly effective. Every engagement henceforth was informed by the lessons of Vella Gulf. Technology without leadership was impotent, but leadership wielded through technology was unstoppable. And yet, the human element remained central. Moosbrugger's calm decisiveness, his faith in his men and their instruments, had been just as critical as the SG radar itself. His ability to trust the unseen, to act on data rather than assumptions, exemplified the transformation underway in the Navy. These were not just ships firing blindly in the dark, they were precise instruments of war, guided by trained minds and unseen waves of energy, redefining the art of naval combat. By the end of August, the psychological and tactical landscape had shifted. American forces could now challenge Japanese night supremacy, striking first and vanishing before retaliation. The Battle of Vella Gulf became a blueprint for future operations across the Pacific, demonstrating that technological superiority, combined with disciplined execution, could decisively alter the course of battle. Weeks later, as the sun rose over the Solomons, the significance of Vella Gulf settled into the Navy's collective consciousness. The battle was more than a tactical victory, it was proof that innovation, when trusted and skillfully applied, could transform the very nature of warfare. Radar, once a laboratory curiosity, had become the invisible hand guiding American destroyers to victory, turning what had been a vulnerability, the cover of darkness, into a decisive advantage. Moosbrugger and his officers were lauded for their daring and discipline, yet the true heroes were often unseen. The radar operators whose steady hands and sharp eyes translated pulses of microwaves into life-saving intelligence. They had become the silent sentinels of the night, ensuring that each torpedo found its mark and that not a single American sailor fell victim to the darkness. The synergy of leadership, technology, and human skill had created a template for success that would echo through every naval engagement that followed. The Japanese, confronted with this new reality, were forced to adapt, but the advantage had irrevocably shifted. Where once they had stalked the night with impunity, they now faced invisible hunters who struck without warning. The psychological impact was immense. Night no longer guaranteed safety or surprise, it now carried the anxiety of uncertainty. American destroyers, once seen as easy prey in nocturnal waters, became ghosts capable of delivering devastating blows. The broader lessons of Vella Gulf resonated far beyond the Solomons. Naval warfare was no longer solely about firepower or ship size, it had become a contest of innovation, situational awareness, and rapid adaptation. Radar technology, integrated into doctrine and trusted by commanders, transformed the battlefield, illustrating that those who mastered both tools and tactics could redefine the rules of engagement. It was a pivotal moment in the Pacific War, one that saved countless lives, preserved critical ships, and reshaped Allied strategy. Decades later, historians would reflect on that night in August 1943 as a turning point in night surface combat. The victory demonstrated that technology alone was not enough, success required the courage to trust it, the skill to apply it, and the vision to see beyond conventional methods. Moosbrugger's 6 destroyers had proven that the unseen could dominate the scene, that the dark could become an ally, and that innovation, when wielded decisively, could rewrite history itself. In the endless expanse of the Pacific, where countless battles had been fought under the cloak of night, the story of Vella Gulf remains a testament to the silent, invisible forces that shape victory. It is the story of men who trusted machines, of operators who transformed data into deadly precision, and of a commander who understood that mastery of technology could turn vulnerability into triumph. In the shadowed waters of the Solomons, darkness was no longer a threat, it had become a weapon.